So Module 17 will conclude with a brief look into adulthood and some of the changes that take place in adulthood. So adulthood is more than just, getting a job, having a career, and raising a family. There's lots of physical changes that happen, including a physical decline as we get older, and our anticipatory reactions towards death. Seeing our family members die, our loved ones die, our friends die, and sort of accepting death as we get older. And of course, sensory changes, so our vision drops. We end up with presbyopia, old sightedness. We need reading glasses. You start not hearing as well as you used to. Reaction time slows. So there's a lot of sensory changes as well. In terms of cognitive development, there's a decrease in memory performance. And of course, we'll get into dementia and Alzheimer's. And in terms of social development, there's a more reliance on commitments. So adult physical development, in our mid-20s, we reach our peak of our physical abilities. This is due to biological changes, maturation. Frontal lobes also fully mature by the mid-20s also. Now, in terms of physical development, we have maximum muscular strength, cardiac output, reaction time, and sensory sensitivity. So there are many physical changes that happen in middle adulthood to old age. Between the age of 40 and 60, vitality goes down, strength decreases, although this is controlled as a function of lifestyle more than just biological decline. So people that are engaging in a healthy lifestyle, they have less physical decline than people that are engaging in an unhealthy lifestyle. For instance, you can see the marathoners, way up in their 70s, even 80s, that they're training constantly. Yes, they're showing some physical decline and maybe they struggle or they slow down, but they're still running marathons or, working out to an extensive amount of time at a very high rate. Marathoners can, there are several marathoners in their 80s and they're still running good times. But some changes are driven by genetic maturation, especially reproductive changes. And so it doesn't matter how good of a shape you're in, reproduction is solely a result of age. So as you get older, there's a decline in sexual activity. Although sexuality can continue, there's a decrease in sex drive or libido. This is probably caused by a significant drop in testosterone in men. Testosterone controls muscle mass as well. So as a man gets older, the decrease in testosterone can lead to the accumulation of fat and the decrease in muscle. As women age and they reach around the age of 50, they enter menopause and they're unable to get pregnant any longer. And they also have physiological changes as a result of hormonal shifts in progesterone and estrogen. So for instance, women entering menopause will have hot flashes, they'll have mood changes, increases of anxiety, sleep difficulties, and these are the result of hormonal shifts. And is there an evolutionary sense for women's fertility end? And the answer is probably, because the older a woman is when she has a child, the higher the child is likely to be born with a disability. So there's an increased risk in Down syndrome, increased risk in autism, increased risk of even a child having bipolar disorder when the woman gets older. And the older the woman is, the higher that risk of a mutation happening and the child being born unhealthy in some way. Now, this is not just women that increase the risk. The age of the man can also contribute to some of these genetic-based diseases. And so the older a man is, the higher the rate of some of these diseases as well. So it's both the woman and the man, but the woman's giving birth, and she has a little bit more control over certain disorders than the man does. The aging body. So our lifespan keeps increasing, and the potential lifespan for the human body is estimated to be about 122 years of age. Now, we're not, many people aren't getting there. But there are many centenarians out there, people over 100, and the vast majority of them are female. I've actually met a couple centenarians, and they're pretty interesting. I mean, amazing that they're around after 100 and still vibrant. Life expectancy is the average expected lifespan, and it differs from country to country. It's been increasing over the years, but the United States sits still a disappointing middle of the pack in terms of life expectancy. You see that Japan and Australia have significantly higher life expectancy than people in the United States. And there's a wide variety of reasons for this. One reason could be healthcare, that there are many people in this country, especially if you're impoverished, that you don't have the healthcare that you need. You don't have access to the advanced medical care that people may have in other countries because they have more universal healthcare. So that's one reason why that might be the case. The other reason might be the emphasis on fast food, the emphasis on obesity in the United States. So we have, we have the world's largest epidemic of obesity, and obesity will decrease life expectancy because it causes heart problems and other cardiovascular issues. So we're still kind of in the middle of the pack. We're above some of these African countries like South Africa and Cameroon, but that's not saying much because medical care in some of these African countries is very much below standard, right? I mean, they're not getting the same care, and they're exposed to many different diseases that we are not exposed to here in the United States. We should be up though with Japan, and you might want to say, well, the Japanese eat healthier. There's more of an emphasis on family dynamics. It's a collectivist society. Maybe that has something to do with it, versus the individualist United States, a very selfish, self-centered society. So maybe there's a benefit for social support in terms of family structure in Japan, and that's why they live longer. There's a large number of reasons for this. Women are generally older than men. And so women will live much older. And when you look at the centenarians, they're mostly women. I've met several centenarian women. I have never met a centenarian male. And by age 100, women outnumber men by a ratio of 5 to 1. Men just die faster, earlier, from many causes at every age. So women's lifespan tends to be higher than that of men. Some of the physical changes that occur upon entering old age are a decrease in visual acuity, sharpness and brightness, presbyopia, which is old-sightedness, the inability to read from close distances. So older people generally need reading glasses. It's very common. As you can see, visual acuity drops to a great degree. Hearing, of course, older people may need hearing aids. They have trouble sensing higher pitches. Reaction time slows, and their general motor ability slows. Their ability to walk can become much slower. They may need the help of a cane or a walker to get around. In terms of driving, their reaction time is much slower, so there's an increased risk of accidents on the road. And their neural processing speed decreases for complex and even for novel tasks. So older people are not as good at learning new things or very complex things, and they're not very good at task switching, which means like if they're doing one task and they have to stop and then start a new task and then go back to the first task, they slow down greatly. They have trouble switching tasks. In terms of health and immunity, there are also changes as people become more elderly. The bad news is that the immune system declines and people have more difficulty fighting off major illnesses. So a case of bronchitis or pneumonia, especially pneumonia early in life, is something that people can generally get through. They take antibiotics, they go home, they rest in bed, and they get better. In the case of someone who's much older, a case of pneumonia could be very, very complicated. They have trouble fighting it off. The antibiotics don't work as well. They need to be hospitalized, and they can even die from things. So Younger people can bounce back from some major illnesses. Older people struggle and can actually die from major illnesses. Some of the good news is that the immune system has accumulated so many antibodies throughout their years that minor illnesses become much easier to fight off. And as we age, in general, we get sick less. We get less minor illnesses, but the illnesses that we get tend to stay with us. They tend to be more severe in nature. So a child will get a lot of illnesses, but they're minor illnesses. They'll bounce back from them. But when an adult gets sick, they get sick for quite a while. You know, they don't get sick like every week like a child does, but when they're sick, they're pretty sick. And the older you get, when you're pretty sick, the more dangerous it is. Now, exercise can do a lot for you. I mean, it helps both the body and it helps the brain. So, exercise can build muscles and bones. It helps prevent the onset of arthritis by building muscle up. It stimulates neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which helps form new memories. Remember, explicit memories are controlled by the hippocampus. It maintains the telomeres, which are the ends of the chromosomes, and those are important for determining your lifespan, among other things. So exercise has been shown to prolong life. Improves cognition. So exercising the body is a way of exercising the mind. So older people are asked or told to stay active because it's going to have many benefits on their overall health. And if their health is better, if they're better cardiovascularly, if they're better, in terms of their musculoskeletal conditions, they're less likely to get arthritis, they're less likely to get Alzheimer's, they're less likely, or other dementias, they're less likely to have cardiovascular illnesses and strokes. So it's very important to stay active. And this activity does not involve doing some heavy loads like hitting the gym for multiple hours at a time. That's not the case. Something as basic as walking is very effective for elderly people. Just walking a little bit every day, and that's because it's easy on the joints and it's very healthy for the heart and for the mind. Now, unfortunately, there are some changes that happen in the brain with age, and it's a decrease in neural processing. So whereas neural processing peaks in your teenage years, it starts declining as you get older. Neural processing slows even more down. Regions of the brain that are related to memory begin to shrink with age, making it hard to form new memories. Now, this doesn't mean it's dementia, but as people get older, their memories decrease. Dementia is a very severe form of memory disorder where people have affective changes along with memory changes. The frontal lobes atrophy. So remember I was talking about earlier in the course the development of the frontal lobe and how the development of the frontal lobe is not sufficient in teenagers, and they become very risky, very impulsive. And the same thing happens with elderly patients. The frontal lobes will atrophy, and therefore there's a decrease in inhibition and self-control. So they may start saying things they normally wouldn't say, or try doing things they normally wouldn't try. By the age of 80, a healthy brain is 5% lighter than a brain in middle adulthood. So you have substantial neural cell death. Now, Alzheimer's disease is associated with the elderly, but it can also occur earlier in life. It can occur as early as your 40s, which is known as early onset Alzheimer's. And early onset Alzheimer's tend to be more serious and faster progressing than normal Alzheimer's disease. So dementia, and including Alzheimer's, is not a normal part of aging. This is not just a little bit of memory loss. This is severe memory loss, behavioral change, cognitive change, emotional changes that take place over many, many years and eventually lead to death. The dementia symptoms are a decrease in recent events, being able to recall recent events and names of familiar people, so they don't know who you are, even though you're the son or daughter or nephew or grandson, granddaughter. Emotional unpredictability, they may have flat affect, which is basically showing no emotion, and then they become very disinhibited, and then they become very angry, and this emotion can switch back and forth, and it could be really an emotional roller coaster. And there's confusion and disorientation. They don't know where they are. They don't know how they got where they are. Eventually, in the later stages, there's a lack of communication, so they may babble incoherently, or they may say things that make absolutely no sense to you and any other person. They've lost their touch. It's not that they've lost their touch with the reality. It's just that they can't find the right words, basically, to communicate effectively. So they're not schizophrenic or psychotic in any way. So there's neural cell death, a loss of neural network, deterioration of neurons that produce acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is involved in a variety of things. It's involved in motor activity, muscle contraction, but it's also involved in memory. And the neurons that produce acetylcholine get destroyed in Alzheimer's disease. And they're shriveled and broken protein filaments forming plaques. These plaques are made of the protein beta amyloid. So they're beta amyloid plaques, and they also have what is called neural fibrillary tangles. So the axons of neurons or the projections of neurons get kind of tangled together, and therefore they can't communicate effectively. And so a lot of the research into Alzheimer's is based on how do we stop the accumulation of this beta amyloid plaques, and that's the key target for helping treat Alzheimer's disease. And there's been some advances in that, and you'll be seeing that in the videos for this module in the course. And the last thing in Alzheimer's disease is the dramatic shrinking of the brain. Now, if you don't have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are still subtle memory and learning changes that take place as you get older. Rote memorization declines more than the ability to learn meaningful information. So just studying some arbitrary text is going to be more difficult for an elderly person than remembering personal information that means a lot to them. And their ability to learn new skills declines less than their ability to learn new information. So motor-based memories are easier to pick up than just, memorizing a passage of a text or something they consider fairly arbitrary. In terms of social development, is adult social development driven by biological maturation or by life experiences? So once again, nature and nurture. And some adults, as they get older, reach their quote-unquote midlife crisis, where they reevaluate their life plans and success. This does not peak at any age, but usually by middle age, or late middle age, a person may examine their life and realize that they're missing a bunch of things. And so then they need to do something or behave in a certain way to make up for that midlife crisis, their perceived deficit. For about 25% of adults who seem to have this emotional midlife crisis, the trigger tends to be either an illness, divorce is very common, job loss, problems parenting, problems with children. But divorce and illness are really big factors. A marriage that's gone downhill, a family life that's not the way they envision it to be. Their life just hasn't turned out the way they want it to be, and they want to go back in time. It's almost like they want to relive their youth. So they go out and they buy this very, very expensive sports car, that they can't afford. And they may start dressing in a different way, to just look younger. They may hit the gym and try to work out. And so you may know someone that has this. I've actually known a few people that have gone through this. One guy that I know that when he was in his 50s, he bought a convertible BMW for I don't know how much money, more money than he had. And he was driving around and he thought he was like so cool, and I don't know where that came from, but he was just trying to relive his youth. He had gotten divorced. His children were a little bit older. He had nothing much going on in his life, and he just wanted to turn back the clock, and this is one way of doing it. If you ever seen the movie, I think the movie was American Beauty, where Kevin Spacey is just dissatisfied with his life, and he wants to change everything around, and he quits his job, and he starts working out. He starts pretending like he's young and hip and cool, and talking to his daughter's friends who are in high school. This is kind of the emotional instability, right? The I can't take my life. I failed at my life. I don't like my current situation. I want to go back, and the past is so much better than the present. Turn back the clock. That's the midlife crisis. And a small percentage of people will actually reach that midlife crisis somewhere between 40 and 60 usually. Now, as we get older, we have different kinds of commitments. We have a commitment to love. There's a strong desire for a loving relationship. And why is there such a commitment to love? Why is it a desire to be in a loving, healthy relationship as we get older? Well, it could be because this helped from an evolutionary perspective children survive long enough to reproduce. So you were there to take care of your children until they can then grow up, reproduce on their own, and the cycle continues. And so there's a strong desire to be in a relationship of some kind. When you're younger, there's not the strong desire. I mean, there's no need to settle down. People will just live their life. Uh, Whatever happens, happens. Relationships are not taken that seriously. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. People just want to, date many different people. There's not a commitment for finding one person to settle down with. As you get older, of course, there's more of a drive to push you in that direction. Now, in terms of married couples, these married couples tend to stay together more than couples who simply live together. There's something about marriage that makes each person more willing to work on the relationship than couples that just live together. They feel that they can go their separate ways more easily. And marriage is generally a good thing for most people. That is, if you're not in a really bad marriage. So marriage is associated with happiness and fewer social problems such as crime, child delinquency, etc. People generally are happier when they're married than when they're single, unless they're in a horrible, horrible marriage. There's also a commitment to work. So work roles largely define an adult identity, especially in individualist capitalistic cultures like the United States. We're in a capitalist society. It's all about the individual in our culture. We talk about I have this, I am this, I need this. This is a lot different than, say, Asian cultures who are collectivistic and they emphasize the group more than the individual. So in our culture, work roles are very important. The first thing you say when you meet someone, oh, what do you do? I am a lawyer. I am a doctor. This is very important to people. This defines their identity. And as you get older, your job is going to define your identity. When you're younger and you're working, at fast food or whatnot, it's not like I work, I cook fries at McDonald's. You might tell someone that, but this is not how you define your life. As you get older and you're set in for a career, this is how you define your life. It's very important to you. Career is a part of your identity as you get older. However, tough economic times can make it difficult. And for an older individual who's fired or laid off in this tough economic climate, they may experience an identity crisis. It may be very difficult for them to find a new job because people may want to hire younger workers for cheaper. And this major component of their life now has been uprooted. And so they have no sense of who they are. They have no sense of where they're going. And it's a very disturbing experience. Younger people can bounce back from loss of a job. Older people would really struggle losing a job they've been at for some time or a job that they actually love. And work satisfaction seems to be a function of having the fit between the work person's interest and it provides a sense of accomplishment and competence. So if the job is way too easy, like anyone could do this job, it's not going to lead to much work satisfaction. So the job has to both interest you, the field you're going into, but also make you think that you have to work hard or put you to work at the job. Because if a job's too easy, it's just not satisfying to you. So why do people claim to be happy even as their body declines? So you feel the old age coming on, you feel the arthritis. It hurts every morning to wake up, it hurts every evening. You have trouble sleeping, your body is breaking down. Your memory is not as good as it used to be. You're tired more often than usual, yet people are still not too miserable. And older people can seem at peace with the world, much more than, you're in your 30s and 40s. It could be because older people attend less to negative information and more to positive information. So they just see the bright side of things. They don't focus on the negative minutia that younger people tend to be overwhelmed with. I mean, even college students are tend to be overwhelmed with these automatic negative thoughts, and this can lead to anxiety and depression. Older people have an ability to kind of tune that stuff out. They realize it's not important. I'm not going to worry about it. They've also accumulated many more positive memories, which tend to last longer than the negative memories. So when they think back about their life, they see positive things. They don't focus too much on the negative things. And so they feel better about their lives. And older people feel an increased sense of competence and control. They have a greater stability of mood. They've lived their whole life. They feel in control of their life. And they're happy where they are. Now, that's not to say that older people can't get depressed, and I had mentioned that older people can be suicidal. They can. But if you look at the overall average, older people generally report higher levels of happiness than younger people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Coping with death and dying, and this is the big problem in the older population, is you are starting to come to the conclusion or to the acceptance that life doesn't continue. And you go through a variety of stages for this. First thing you do is you see your parents die, and that's a transition. So once your parents die, it shakes you to the core. If anyone's had experienced a parent or unfortunately both parents passing away, it's very, very disturbing to see sickness and death in your parents because that leaves you vulnerable. You have a new sense of vulnerability once a parent dies. Before the parent dies, it just seems like, you're younger usually. You're most of the time you're in relatively okay health. You're not thinking about death, but once that parent dies, you start thinking about death and your own mortality. And then as you get older, more and more people start dying that you know. You have friends that die, and they could die unexpectedly. Or they may die because they're getting a little older, and they start getting, illnesses, major illnesses at a greater rate. If the death is unexpected, the grief is much more intense. There's a denial phase. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of death and dying, and you can learn that in a death and dying course. But one of the first stages is denial. If you go to a funeral of someone that unexpectedly dies, people seem relatively calm. And it's because they haven't registered it yet. They're still in a bit of denial over what has actually happened. And that denial phase comes and goes, and it may take months to years to really come to grips with the acceptance that someone that you loved is dead and they no longer can be with you here on earth. There's no standard of pattern for the length of the grieving process. Unfortunately at these jobs, if a parent dies, they give you 4 or 5 days of paid time off. Well, guess what? 4 or 5 days, you're not going to be in any shape to go back to work. Yeah, you'll have the funeral or the wake or whatever ceremony your religion deems that you have. Burial or non-burial depends on what religion you follow. But you're not ready to go back to work after 4 or 5 days. Unfortunately, our society wants you and expects you to go back to full productivity. The grieving process is very long. There's no standard pattern of grieving. There's no established pattern or acceptable pattern of grieving. Some people cry all the time. Others don't cry at all. It doesn't mean that if you cry because a family member dies that you're more strongly connected to them. You're not. Everyone's got a different pattern of grieving. There's nothing wrong with crying, and there's nothing wrong with not crying. We all show grief or experience grief in unique ways. And there's no length. It's not that after a year you're okay. You're not. There's going to be days where you're fine. And there's going to be days when you break down. There's going to be days where you're happy and days where you just spontaneously start crying. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if the grieving process is overwhelming and you can't function and you can't sleep at night and you're not eating because you're just so overwhelmed and devastated, well, then that can be problematic. It could be a sign of depression caused from the grief spiraling out of control, and you need to see a mental health counselor, psychiatrist, some professional to get the appropriate treatment. But if it's just grief, normal grief, it can last for years. And it could be 10, 20 years later that you're still thinking back and sad and upset and crying. And especially on the holidays, it could be very tough. And as you get older, the number of people that you're intimately connected with will start, increasing. The number of people dying will increase. And so you're going through deaths and multiple deaths. And that's why you see a lot of elderly people, they're just subject to all of this death. Their spouse dies. Their friends die. Their parents have long been dead. Their other relatives are dead or, close to death. Even in some cases, some children of theirs might be dead. And it becomes very overwhelming as you get older to deal with these multiple deaths. Dealing with that one death is tough. Dealing with multiple deaths or seeing loved ones die at a rapid rate is extremely depressing, and the person feels very isolated and says, why am I here? I have no one here. And that's what leads to the increase in depression and suicide. So, it's a matter of how much you're exposed to, and it can take its toll. Now, it helps to have social support. So if you have friends or family to face the reality of death, or counseling, or a psychiatrist visit, this can all help mitigate. So you need someone to talk to at this time. You need loved ones. Unfortunately, as you get older and people start dying, and if you get really old, those loved ones may not be there anymore. You may have outlived some of your loved ones or all of your loved ones. And then the impact of further deaths around you, you can't offset that impact, that emotional impact. You have no one to really turn to. So it's very important for the elderly, if they don't have any social support, family members or friends where they can really grieve with, that they turn to a counselor or a mental health worker to get the assistance they need in these troublesome times. Because older people are hit hard by multiple deaths. But eventually, with the right help, everyone can grieve appropriately or grieve in time and get back to their normal life. And realize that you cherish the memories of these people that have died. And you live on and try to make the best of things. And that's what a lot of elderly people need, especially when they're very sick and they have no family or friends left. They need the support from professionals to get through things.